Hi folks, thanks for coming out today to listen to this. So I got here yesterday from Los Angeles at about 6 in the morning. I showed up at Kathy's house at 6:45. Hello, I'm here. And she's been she was actually still sleeping. So she's been a very gracious host, and I just want to say thanks to Kathy. I'm a Californian. I didn't grow up in California, but I've lived there for about 20 years. And this is my first trip to Australia. And I am feeling rather awake, but my brain is not fully synced to my words. I don't know. So we will see what comes out. I've practiced this talk. I've crafted it. But the book just actually came out in print maybe a month ago. And this is the first talk I've given about this book as a whole and about some of the topics. So I'm kind of thinking with you a little bit. And I'm not sure that this is the final argument about this book that I want to say, but I'm excited to talk with you. And I do want to say that the subtitle of this book is what I actually wanted to call it, and Routledge wouldn't let me because they like a title that is more indexable. But this really is an argument that video should just be an everyday literacy practice in classrooms. That video, in the end, is not super special. It's just another way of making meaning. So I think that's my foundational final argument. But I'm going to go through a lot of other arguments today. So I have a little plan or an outline. And I'm sorry that the big screen's over here and you're over here, but you have it here too. So I'm going to talk a little bit, introduce myself, and some of my past work and current interests, and Kathy gave a nice intro to that as well. I'm going to then talk about the research site and some big questions that this project seeks to answer. Then I will talk a little bit about data collection and analysis, not very much. Then I'll describe 3 kinds of projects that children undertook. And sort of what we learned. And when I say we, I mean me and my research team of many undergraduate and teacher credential students who worked with me over time. This was a 4-year project. Then I'm going to talk about some larger arguments that I'm making based on these projects. And then I'm going to talk about some final thoughts. And you'll notice that this is kind of white to black. That's my effort to kind of code my own talk so that I can color code and see where I am in the talk. So it's not that the ideas get more depressing or somber, but it's just a color scheme for myself. So this is me in 1998 in San Francisco Unified School District as a kindergarten teacher. I obviously look exactly the same. No, I'm just kidding. But you can see here that this is a pretty diverse group of kids. And when I went to teach kindergarten in California at the time, it was my real awakening to diversity and what that meant in California, in the California context. My classrooms were always full of English learners. They were full of Latino kids who weren't English learners at all. So a huge variety in a Latino population in California. I had African-American students, I had white students. This particular school was a very integrated school. So my early interest in research when I went to graduate school were around not so much how kids acquired language and literacy, but what they did with literacy practices in schools. And they were based in an interest in looking at kids in diverse contexts, and me as a white person in a diverse context, what that meant, and interacting with kids from different places. So I'd say, whoa, go back one. So my first big research question that guided probably 5 or 6 years of my work was how do kids create identities through their literacy practices? And I've written about this in my dissertation. That was the subject of my dissertation, which I did at the school that I had taught kindergarten at, looking at 5th graders who had been my kindergarten students years before. So I had a long-term relationship at that school site, and I like a long-term ethnographic relationship at a school. Then I went and I moved and I got my first job, and then I began to investigate in what ways mandated school literacy programs affect children's literacy learning. And Kathy mentioned this book, Overtested. And then I've written lots of other stuff in relation to this issue. After I did this project, I mean, it was a rather depressing project in the end. You know, overtesting it really negatively affects children's and teachers' literacy practices in the classroom. But after I did this project, I wanted to make things with children, and then I wanted to do critical digital literacies, and that is what I hadn't really seen at this school site. In fact, I've written about how I've seen sort of the mandating of critical literacy, which of course turns it into not a very critical project when you're making students inquire in a certain way about certain issues. So my next area of inquiry was, how do we do critical digital literacies? How do we make things with kids? How do we help them engage in critical practices using digital text and digital media? And as Kathy mentioned, I've done a couple edited books on critical literacies and critical digital literacies, and now this book, and I've been writing about this issue. So what I want to do is I want to start, let's see, okay. I want to start with a little video, and I want to preface this. This is a video about a boy named Abel, and he is going to speak in Spanish and then in English. So it's a very short video, and it's a video about himself. And it's about a family tradition. This was one of the kinds of videos we made where kids were talking about themselves. He had actually made an autobiography with us before, and this was the next year, and he made this video. So
Navidad es mi época favorita del año porque tenemos regalos, pero no sé lo que está dentro de ellos, así que es muy emocionante. Christmas is my favorite time of the year, probably because our parents give us presents for free. Guys, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you later. Peace out.
So in the rest of this video, I'm going to show snippets of children's videos. That was his entire video. And I used it as an introduction to show you the kind and the quality of video kids made. Not a high production value, I would say, to be kind to the student. But there's all sorts of things going on in this video. There's 2 languages, there's words on the screen, there's sound effects, there's music. There's the iPad uses what's called the Ken Burns effect of scanning images. And you can see how he used that and didn't care. He had still photographs of himself taken with the iPad and moving images and video text as well. So I'll talk about all of that stuff, but I want to give you a sense. So these are the big questions that guided this project. First, what kind, and sorry that it's back behind me, I have to read it. Oh, I could read it over here. What kinds of literacy practices emerge when students participate in ongoing cycles of everyday digital video composition in language arts, social studies, and science curricula? So I was actually curious to know what kinds of practices might emerge that might be different than what I would see in a classroom without video. How or in what ways does the process of embedding these composing practices into curricula reshape the practices and the curricula? Or does it? You know, does making video make a difference to what kids are learning or how they're learning? In what ways, well, does everyday video making help students consider their audiences, their community connections, and the broader implications of their school-based ideas? And this question is related to the school site, which I'll talk about more in a minute, but it was a school that the community wanted, and it was a charter school. It was a very popular school in this community, and so I was very interested in how the children were relating to their broader community. And then finally, how might we use video making in school in the service of social justice to explore children's potential social and political power? Undergirding all of these questions are some fundamental theoretical backgrounds of my own. The first is a sociocultural perspective on human interactions around texts of all kinds. I'm fundamentally a sociocultural researcher. I believe that watching people interact around and with text requires us to understand the relationships between people and their potential audiences. I could talk about that for a long time, but that's all I'll say. I also have what I would call an axiological commitment to redistributive social justice. So I was fundamentally interested in working in a school. This was a school that I'll talk about more in a minute, but it was about 70% of the kids had free and reduced price lunch. About 60% of them were English learners. It was a school with a fair number of students with special needs, and there wasn't a lot of video or digital work in the school at all. So I wanted to redistribute practices that kids in more higher socioeconomic classrooms and schools may have already had access to, schools with more laptop carts and schools with more iPads. And those things are actually now a little more common in schools, but using them to create is not always very much more common. So I was very interested in making and creating digital video, not consuming it with kids. And then finally, I was interested in a desire-centered approach to research. Eve Tuck, who's now at OISE, was in upstate New York, and she's a Native American researcher who has written a lot about desire-centered research, that we as researchers need to work with communities on what they desire, not focus on damage, and not focus on what's wrong, but focus on what communities want and what people in communities want and how to work with them to explore those desires. So those are my fundamentals, I would say. So I want to show you a video. This is a very curated video. It's actually, including this title bit here, is a set, I called clips from videos. So at the very end of my project, the school district wanted to close this charter school. So it was a dual language charter school. Monday, Wednesday, Friday, the language was in Spanish, and Tuesday, Thursday, the instruction was in English. It was a model that they had chosen, had its pros and cons. And some students were able to engage in literacy instruction in their native language until they were at a level of fluency where they could write in their second language. Esperanza is the pseudonym for the school. That actually means hope in English. The kids are speaking Spanish and English. I speak Spanish. So Kathy just asked me that. She said, "Oh, you speak Spanish?" I'm like, "Yeah, all Californians do, really." So it's a dual language charter school, and the charter in the US means that the school district runs its regular schools, and a charter is granted to a specific group or set of individuals to run this school with public funds as they see fit, they're accountable to the district for test scores being okay. And basically they have two accountability measures. One is, are their test scores standard compared to the district? And the second is, are they running budget, is the finances okay? So the school, Esperanza, the year I began the project, the district threatened to close the school because their finances were not in good shape and their test scores were not in good shape. They had opened a second site, which is where I did all my research. They had spent too much money building a school, and their test scores weren't that high. And this is partly because they had just taken in a bunch of new middle and high school students, and partly because they had a lot of poor and second language learning students, and their scores just weren't that high. The school district did eventually, so they got an extension, and then 3 years later, at the end of my project, the school district threatened to close the school again, and they revoked the charter. So the school appealed to the county, which also said no, and then they appealed to the state Board of Ed, and the state also said no. So the school did close at the end of my project. In the course of this, the last video the kids made in the project was a series of what I call Save Our School videos. They wrote letters and they made the videos. And so these are clips from those videos where kids interviewed their peers and the teachers to ask them, why do you want the school to stay open and why? And then they showed these videos to school board members, to obviously no effect. But they're kind of compelling. So this is just an introduction to the school in the words of a few kids that I thought were compelling, and also they don't mention the name of the school.
Well, it's a nice school, and they make fun choices for us to play outside and to make new stuff.
I noticed a lot of art on the walls. I noticed the community was really tight. These are all things I noticed right away. So when I was offered a position here, I was excited. And I said, absolutely, I want to take it. And I've been here for 2 years now, and I don't regret a single second of it. It's a really wonderful place.
I like how they let me figure out my own ways about learning, and that they don't force us to use language. They bend to how much of Spanish that I know. I barely know any Spanish, but they help me learn and help me adapt to the bilingual system.
I like my friends and teachers, that I can trust the teachers. They're like my best friends, and sometimes they help me fix my problems.
So the one other thing I want to mention about the school before I forget is it was based on a constructivist model of education, which was actually hard for some of the teachers who had not come out of constructivist teacher education programs. But the students obviously liked figuring things out on their own. It was also had a no discipline, no reward, a no punishment, no reward discipline policy, which was also difficult for teachers, but was attempted to create a community where people talked about their problems and related to each other and didn't punish and also didn't reward for good behavior. So I also want to talk a little bit about where we made the videos in school. So we made videos as part of the curriculum. So, the teachers would say, okay, it's the beginning of 3rd grade and we're writing autobiographies. So we would make an autobiographical video that would either go with the written script, or later we changed our ways and tried photographs and then writing. But because we had about 9 iPads, what we would do is we would pull kids out, and the teacher would say, okay, they're ready with their script, so go. And this is a supply closet, which is sort of a typical place for us to be working. The school had built a new building, and it was a sort of refurbished factory, so there's these huge open spaces, so the sound quality, as you've heard, varied a lot. And so sometimes we'd be in these quiet rooms. You can see the iPad there's always some iPad plugged in. There's probably a kid at the end of that cord. So this was a typical space. So I also want to talk about me as a researcher here. So up on the top left is actually a clip from one of those videos about saving the school where they interviewed me as a researcher at the school, sort of a solipsistic moment. Over here on your left is me with some of the teachers from the first year of the project. You might notice I'm pregnant there, and that child down there was about 3, and that's one of my children. And 2 years later, he attended the school as a kindergartner in the year that the school closed. And then the baby who was in there was a toddler and who would occasionally come to the field site with me. This is a very community-oriented school. There were parents and kids in and out of the school all the time. So it was a very comfortable place to be part of a larger community. And then there's me wearing this same outfit. That really is me. I noticed this morning, with 2 of my student research assistants presenting about some of the findings from this last year. So I spent a long time at this school. I wrote letters to the school board protesting its closure, et cetera. And I was there a long time, and I was trying to work with teachers. I also did a lot of professional development with teachers on critical thinking, critical literacies, and other things. these are the teachers themselves, or some of them, and I only have them here so that you can see the diversity of the teaching profession in the U.S. I think about the statistics are still about 85% of the teachers are white, and the student population in most places is much, much less white than that. This school, I think about 95% of the teachers were Latino or Latina, and all of them, of course, bilingual. It was a very diverse group of teachers themselves, you know, the occasional teacher from Mexico or Central America, as well as a lot of native English speakers who had learned Spanish, and then some native Spanish speakers. So a very interesting teacher group as well. Okay, so I want to talk a little about data collection and analysis, not too much. I'm an ethnographer by training, so this was fundamentally an ethnographic study of literacy practices and digital making. But one of the effects of that was that I was writing field notes, and I'll talk about that more in a minute, and I was writing analytic memos and collecting artifacts from the field, and recording interviews and doing interviews and surveys with kids, but I was also making things with kids and trying to figure out different ways to capture what it was that they were doing as they were making. And so, well, I'll say more about that in a minute. It was also a design-based project, and we did 9 cycles of video production over 4 years, and so after every cycle, I would try something slightly different. I would say, okay, we've interviewed every child about their video in depth for this cycle. Next cycle, we're going to try surveys before and after. And the next cycle, we're going to do the surveys again and see, you know, so we tried different things based on what we thought had worked in a methodological sense, and also based on what else I wanted to learn that I couldn't learn with the methods I had used for one cycle. And I documented all of those kinds of data choices over time. This is a table of the data. Well, this is a table of the data I collected over time. So I just want to show you. So over 4 years, about 360 videos, about 300 interviews with kids, about 200 field notes, 150 analytic memos, and 130 surveys. And the numbers go up and down. One thing I want to draw your attention to is you can see the field notes go up and then they go down. And the same thing with the analytic memos. They go up and then they go down gradually. This is partly because in the last 2 years, we really were focused more on making, and we were doing lots of making and less field note writing. And partly this is because in the analytic memos, I was also analyzing data and writing about the project. So I was doing less thinking about the data as I was doing it and more sort of writing up of findings already as I went. Anyway, so that's the sense of the data for you. This is one of the methodological tools I use for analysis, the multimodal transcript, which you guys may already know about. It really is it privileges the image as the unit of analysis. So this is across the top here, a screenshot of every image in the movie, and then rows here for time on the screen, for any written titles on the screen, then notes about the image, the actual spoken narration by the child, written script if they had a written script. So sometimes, I'll tell you about that in a minute. Music, what music they were using or notes about it. Comments that they made in the interviews. So if we did interview kids, we stopped at every image and said, why did you use that image? Why not that one? Et cetera. Or, I mean, you know, why? What was the point? Et cetera. And then any interpretive notes we made as we were making the transcripts. And we use these for many purposes. One, for instance, was to compare narration versus written script to see how kids made changes between what they wrote and then what they said. I've done them to count how many images children used or how long images were on screen. Kathy and I are writing a paper about blooper reels, funny videos at the end of movies, and we use them to see how long the funny parts were in comparison to the real videos and things like that. So useful. So I'm going to talk now about project descriptions. 3 of the videos they made were about narrating the self. 2 of them were about teaching facts. And then 4 were about taking critical stances, which is what I was aiming for, but which obviously didn't always happen. So I'm going to describe each one of these for you and show them to you a little bit. I have no sense of how long I've been talking. Does anyone know? I should have asked. I'm good?
You're good.
Okay.
Very good.
Okay, okay. So this one, I'm going to show you a clip from a video that is an autobiography by a girl named Devaney, and that's her real name because I want to show you some funny things. So she starts off by saying there were 2 strangers walking. Then they bumped into each other in Mexico DF in a neighborhood. And Mexico DF is the Mexico City Central District. So this is the beginning, and she's talking about her parents' meeting, which was a common beginning of a video. So here you go. Now this one had a...
There were 2 strangers walking, then they bumped into each other. In Mexico DF, in a neighborhood. 3 years later, they got married and promised they never separate. 5 years later, my mom and dad had a baby, and guess who that baby was? It was me. My dad wanted to name me Jasmine or B, but my mom knew the perfect name for me. It was... Mom was proud because baby and they loved me very much.
So this goes on in this vein, but this is just a sense of the kind of video children did. And I'll come back to some of it later, but I want to say a few things that I learned from these particular videos. One was the sort of heteroglossic voices that you could see in kids' specific and schematic narratives. So first of all, kids were orchestrating all of these voices about their lives. You know, what their parents said about how they had been, what their teachers wanted them to recount, what other peers asked and said about their lives. So when you ask a kid to make an autobiography or to narrate a self, they're orchestrating all these ideas about a self into one moment. And also, I have analyzed lots and lots of these narratives about the self, and there's schematic features. You know, most kids talk about being born. Some talk about parents meeting, about being born, about going to preschool, going to kindergarten. So there are these schematic features of the self, of the life narrative. But then there are also these specific moments, probably the moments that make us feel like individuals. You know, when I lost my first tooth, or when I was named this and why, what was special, or when my sister was born and what was special about that, or when I came to the U.S. So there's this combination of moments in these narratives. The second finding that I have been thinking about a lot in relation to narrating the self is I've seen a lot of immigrant and transnational children's identity work visible in these videos. And I've written about this before, but it still comes back to me. This is a screenshot from a video, and this is actually a girl's finger. She's got a globe. She's taking a picture of her finger pointing to Honduras, which is where she came from. And so she's narrating herself and saying, this is where I came from. The second kind of video kids made were teaching facts. And so there were two of these in the end. One of them was about birds, and I'll talk about that in a minute. The other one was a group project on the U.S. Civil Rights Movement. And I'm going to show a clip about the Little Rock Nine. And this was a group of 9 African-American students who integrated the Little Rock High School in Little Rock, Arkansas. And they were U.S. civil rights heroes.
Little Rock 9 was very brave to go to a white high school. They went to a school called Little Rock Central High. On September 23, 1957, Little Rock 9 drove toward the school that morning. The students knew what awaited them, an angry group of white protesters.
Little Rock 9 were the 9 African-American students involved in the desegregation of Little Rock School.
I don't know if you heard the turning of pages in the background. Yeah, okay. So, you know, these videos where kids taught brought a lot of work to me about, brought a lot of information to me and a lot of findings about the relationship between expository writing and digital making. In some ways, it was the very easiest kind of project to do, to tell a kid, make a video about a bird of your choice. So this is a screenshot behind here of the dodo bird. So a boy picked the dodo bird as his project, and you see the dodo bird lived more than 30 years. So they liked this. They liked writing down facts. They liked narrating it on their own or in groups. It was a sort of a clear cut to them in a way. And expository writing was one of the 3 kinds of writing in our U.S. Common Core standards. And teachers also like this. But it also brought up issues of assessment. These were also the one project that we assessed, I'll talk more about this later, was the birds project. And they were the sort of easiest in some ways to assess because you could also assess were the children conveying facts, and it seemed sort of factual and clear. Not always, but it seemed that way. The last kind of videos that kids made were taking critical stances, and they made 4 of these, and one of them was about, they had to pretend to be a boy character in a novel and make a video about the boy, sort of put themselves in that kid's shoes. In these, they had to do something similar. We were celebrating Cesar Chavez Day, which in the US, he's a civil rights hero as well for the rights of the worker. He led workers' rights movements in the 60s, and we have a national holiday for him. And they were doing something similar. They had to go and interview someone out of school or in school about their life, like literally, what do you do all day? What is your life like? And try to understand that person's life. And so this is a video about Susie, the teacher's aide.
Susie wakes up, eats breakfast, and goes to work at 6:45. Susie works really hard because she has to take care of kids at Mi Casita 3:30 through 6:30. After she's done with Mi Casita, she goes to the gym, then goes to sleep with her cat.
So I'm going to say more about this in a minute, but one of the things that these kinds of videos brought up, the last of the critical videos was trying to save the school, and another one was an effort to, they did another project about saving the world that was somewhat critical. So I have a lot to say about these critical videos, but one is that, you know, doing critical digital literacies in school is hard. Like out of 9 projects, only 4 of them came out as critical. Teachers didn't always want to do that. Sometimes they wanted a teaching facts kind of project. They didn't always want kids to be inquiring or changing their worlds in some ways. They also were very place-based. So this is actually a picture from the school-wide assembly about Cesar Chavez Day and the Day of the Worker, where we actually showed some of those civil rights videos. So this was very much related to this community and this Latino community and what kids were interested in studying, and the civil rights heroes were chosen about what is sort of kids' interest and the interest in the place. It was also very much a permeable curriculum. These were the projects, some of the other ones too, where kids' home and school lives met back and forth. And place-based literacies is a Barbara Comer kind of term, and the permeable curriculum is an Ann Dyson term. You know, for kids, the curriculum should be permeable and things should go in and out. And finally, there are all sorts of issues around communicative digital ethics with these kinds of projects, where you're asking a kid to take a stance and you're asking a kid to you know, try to change their world or see what is different in their world. Like who are they making the video for? What should they and shouldn't they be saying? And Julian Sefton Green and Alan Luke have been writing a lot about digital ethics lately, so I've been thinking about that a fair bit. But I want to talk now about the larger arguments out of this project, and we'll see how coherent I am at this point in the day. So I have 3 of them. The first is about what classrooms and texts look like when kids are at the center and in charge of the means of textual production. And this is partly because, you know, the teacher really did have to let the kid go do things on the iPad in a way that was different. When your kid is writing in front of you, you can see it a little more clearly. But when the kid is doing this stuff on the screen, unless you're right there with them, you're not seeing what it is that they're doing. So in some ways, kids are centered. They're definitely in charge. And I'm going to talk about working with kids' own design sensibilities, and then fostering activism and civic engagement, and what some of the lessons I learned were. So first, kids at the center. So this is I like this picture. I like the juxtaposition of the written script over there on the right. This is my movie, and it's about the Harajuku lovers. Do you guys have that sort of, it's a clothing line, it's a kind of a thing, I don't know how to describe it. This kid is making a video about it. But, you know, putting children at the center in charge sometimes worked with teachers' own desires and needs, and sometimes conflicted. So teachers really appreciated about making videos that kids were very engaged. Teachers always like it when kids are engaged and interested in their work. They liked what it did for English learners. A kid could, you know, write their narration out. They could practice it. They could listen to it. They could have somebody else listen to it. Instead of sort of giving a presentation in front of the whole class where your English wasn't very good yet and you wanted to, so you could practice and practice. Teachers liked that. They also liked learning about their students. You know, they learned a lot about their students from these kinds of projects. They got to see photos and things from home. And like the day in the life, you know, some kids interviewed their parents, and we heard all sorts of funny things that kids said about their parents and their parents' lives. Teachers liked that. But teachers also wanted structure, and they wanted models, and they wanted, to some extent, they wanted assessment. They wanted a little bit of standardization. So the very first project we did, we didn't have any models. I mean, there just weren't very many. There aren't a lot of videos made on the internet. Now there's a lot of YouTube stuff around gaming, but there weren't necessarily a model. So the first time we did it, we tried to show a few digital stories, and that was more adult. And then we kind of made them, and then we used the videos we had made as models. But there are dangers in using models, because then you kind of have a normative thing there. You know, if you say, here's what it ought to look like. But teachers wanted a model, so that was a kind of a need problem there. And teachers also wanted, they wanted ways to connect this with the curriculum, and I think that worked out very well, because they always felt like the projects went like this. So that's all I'll say about teachers for now. There were lots of issues with audience. So kids are making videos. Kids are in control of it. They're doing what they want. But, you know, the audience is kind of infinite, but of course it's really not, because teachers and parents don't actually want, like, their 9-year-old students and children to put their videos about themselves on the internet for everyone to see. But they do want to show them at a parent conference. They do maybe want to show them in the classroom, although kids didn't always want to show their videos in their own classrooms, because kids laughed sometimes, you know, sometimes at the right places and sometimes at the wrong places to each other's videos. So there are all kinds of issues of audience when kids are doing their own thing. They're not always thinking about audience. In fact, sometimes they didn't really care about audience. They were just into the production of it. Sometimes they cared very much, and sometimes they were making a video to make their dad laugh or to make their dad cry. You know, so the the purposes for children and audience varied quite widely. Oh, no, go back. Sorry. So the third thing I want to say is about carnivalesque texts, that sometimes in some of these contexts when kids were at the center doing their own things, in a Bakhtinian sense, the teachers weren't around. There was no authority, and especially at the end of the year when the end of the project when the school was about to close, the world was sort of turned upside down for these children, and this is a Bakhtinian term about the carnival. So kids got to have a lot of freedom, but that also left them feeling a little freewheeling, let in space for humor, but there were some times when they felt a little untethered. And then finally, there were all these emotions and desires that were visible in these videos. And those are certainly visible in written text. I'm not saying that they're different, but teachers could see them in different ways and other people could see them. And I'm just going to show you this little clip from this video. And this is an iTunes, iMovie titling convention, the neon convention. It produces this title for the kid and it produces the location as well, which it's supposed to just be Southern California. And he is introducing his own video. This is a kid who is a kind of a tough kid. He's like one of 6 kids. And if you see him, he's like a skateboarder kid. You see his little spiky hair there and stuff, and he's kind of a tough kid. So I think you can hear what he says.
And my teacher is Maggie, and I love it here.
So, I love it here. It was not a word I expected to hear out of this kid's mouth, but kids frequently talked about their emotions in relation to all kinds of things in videos. So what do teachers do with those kinds of emotions? How do you assess them? Do you assess them? Do you ignore them when kids are talking about what they desire, what they love, what they are afraid of in videos? Yeah. The second larger argument I want to make is about working with kids' own design sensibilities, and I'm sure you guys, some of your work, I know it relates to some of this. So the first thing I want to say is about connecting with the audience. So kids loved connecting with the audience. I showed you the video at the beginning of Abel. He's talking, he's narrating, he's got a photograph of himself, and he's got this text on here with the dots, hi, also enjoy my video, and then a sort of smiley face there. Do you see that? And I would say probably 30% of all the videos children made had either a beginning or an ending video of themselves saying, hi, I hope you like my video, or hi, I hope you liked my video, as a way to connect with the audience and say something personal to them. Kids also experimented with mode all the time. So this same kid, he had a still image of himself, he had a video of himself and the same thing. He had I think he had the clapping sound in the background, he had music going on. So they're doing all these things at the same time, and they're just in ways that adults wouldn't do. I wouldn't sit down and make a movie and throw all these things in, and that's how it sometimes looks. But for kids, they're experimenting, they're interested in what it might look like. And they're not always so concerned with the final product. Which brings me to my next argument about design sensibilities, which was that kids, I think, really privileged representation over aesthetics. So there were occasional moments where I saw a video and I said, wow, that kid has really edited this video and has really made it an interesting kind of thing. But more often it was about representation. And so I've put this picture up here of Devanine because for me, if I were making this video, I would have cut this out. I would have made this cute little baby picture here, But she's got this whole Little Mermaid thing here. And we could talk about popular culture and stuff like that. But to her, she wanted her baby picture, and this was the baby picture. This was, her mom gave her the photograph, she took a photograph of it with the iPad. So she's more interested in the fact that the picture is there, not that it aesthetically is a little busy and looks funny. She wants to just be present. The last design sensibility thing I want to talk about is the family. So obviously in self-autobiographies, kids often had pictures of their families, but they really were focused on family. They often wrote about their family. In the day in the life videos when kids were allowed to make a choice about who they interviewed, a lot of them interviewed mom or dad or a cousin or someone. So, and that of course seems obvious, kids focus on their family, that's who they know. But they really focused on the family self, and a family-focused self, I would say. So the last larger argument I want to make and show you some things about is about activism and engagement with critical digital literacies. So I've studied a lot the rhetoric kids used, especially in videos about saving the school, like how do they try to persuade people. And kids are very smart at this, of course. So here's the introduction to a video about saving the school.
What you're about to watch is a statement about why the district should keep our school open.
I just really like that blink at the end. Yeah, she's making sure you listen, and compelling you to listen to her argument about the school. And so this is a video, actually this was one of the aesthetically more pleasing videos that about 4 girls made about keeping the school open, and they were talking directly to school board members. They were saying, well, we want you to keep the school open. And they were trying to persuade, and they were aware of who this would be shown to. The last thing I want to say about activism and civic engagement is about community values. So I've mentioned that this was a school the community did value. At every appeal for this charter, the school sent buses over to the district office, to the county office, even to the State Board of Ed, which was a 6-hour drive away. Busloads of people and families and teachers went to go protest. This is going to be in Spanish. This woman here is a parent at the school, and she's also the school's librarian. So many parents were employed at the school. And she's going to talk about how the school is important to her because it's a community where they raise kids to have values and they train them, they teach them to grow. And I just want you to see her talking. Oh, or not. I have to go back. Uh-oh, am I going the wrong way? Okay.
Somos como una familia. Somos como una familia. Y somos una comunidad que nos interesa a los niños y estamos luchando por ellos día a día para que salgan adelante y tengan un mejor futuro.
Gracias.
I don't know if you caught that at the very end. She goes, to have a better future. She nods like, that's the statement. And then she looks right at the camera. So she's talking to people who she knows are listening to her. And they want them to grow and have a better future. And indeed, she's employed at the school, so she can spend time with her daughter in the school day and be there and be working and foster educational opportunities for her children. So, okay, I have a little related work I want to talk about in this whole project. This is a big sprawling kind of project. So I've been working a lot on digital video with children with special needs. I'd say every year there are about 10 or 12 kids I worked with who had an IEP, which in the US is an individualized education plan. And I've written about a girl with autism with whom we made videos, and I'm working on another case study about a boy who made lots of videos who had all kinds of learning disabilities, which is very common in the US, and how that worked for him and his teachers and what we learned about him through them. I'm also theorizing the audience. I mean, the audience for kids, digital video is a very complicated thing, as I've said a little bit. And audience has been studied in rhetoric and composition and in English education to some extent, but we haven't really thought about what it means, what the audience means in a classroom for products that sort of can go outside of the classroom in ways that are different than written texts, perhaps. I also am always concerned with immigrant kids and identity work and in thinking about how kids present themselves and to whom as they're narrating a self. And then Kathy and I are working on a paper literally today or tomorrow about... We're supposed to be working on a paper about blooper reels, the sort of funny outtakes of videos, and we're thinking about humor and the carnival and what kids do on screen and how they show laughter and emotion. So lots of fun stuff.
Parts of the text that you sort of delete before you
yes, the blooper reel is the outtakes.
That popped up in the data because the kids were playing around at the end of the official school text.
So we're having a lot of fun thinking about laughter and thinking about what kids do kind of on the side, so unofficial. I have a lot of unanswered questions. The first one is about assessment, not how to assess this work in standardized contexts, but, well, yeah, how to assess it. So, we want to standardize things. I want to be able to say something like, when a child is 8, they should be able to make a 30-second movie. When they're 9, a 45-second movie. But that's kind of ridiculous. I mean, so how you standardize this kind of production, and of course media studies people have a lot to say about how to do some kinds of standardization, but it doesn't always transfer to the literacy world, where there are different kinds of standardization and different kinds of assessment. We did a lot of, in one design cycle, we did an inventory of digital video practices that was a very long interview process where we asked a kid to show us what they could do on an iPad and on a laptop and on a phone. So how do you assess what a kid knows and can do is a very complicated process. I also did Think Alouds one cycle where we literally, we screen captured and we kept interviewing, and kids really did not enjoy that process. They were like, just stop asking me what I'm doing. I don't even know. I'm just doing things. But to try to understand what kids are doing and how to assess it. And especially in standardized context, which you guys have a very standardized context here, very similar to the US context, where we're always curious about scores and improvements. If I'm saying that video should be an everyday part of literacy practices, how can we prove to a policy audience that that should be so, or why it should be so? I still have unanswered questions about audience, where to share critical digital projects, how to help kids be activists, young kids, high school kids. It's a lot more obvious, and kids do more of this, I think, but it's an ongoing question. And then I have unanswered questions about teacher preparation. I mean, teacher backgrounds, teachers' interest and ability levels, and decentering the teacher. These are 3 separate things. So the teachers I worked with ranged from people who never made anything on any kind of digital platform and didn't really know how to do anything, to one teacher with a master's in technology. So the range of teacher interest, the range of their preparation, and of course I I run an undergraduate teacher preparation program, and I'm well aware of the lack of training in digital literacies for teachers. There's so many other standards that have to be fit in. Yeah, you guys are all nodding, yes. And then also this issue of decentering the teacher. So if the teacher is not really in charge of these things, what that means for teachers and how you prepare a teacher to do that. So I have some concluding thoughts. So I want to just say that I made a lot of analytic choices in this process, trying new things and trying things that of course limited what I could do in other contexts. And so there are limitations about what I learned and didn't learn. And I could go into all the details of choices we made and could have made differently, things we could have done. But I made a lot of different choices that in retrospect, most of them I would have done again. There were some failures. There was the failure of the school closed. I mean, we didn't save it with our videos or the letters kids wrote. I worked with the student with special needs I worked with lots of learning disabilities, made lots of videos with us, still was moved to a special day class, was taken out of our general class and was put in a class by, with other kids with learning disabilities. Like his video prowess didn't matter to the folks who were making the decision. There were some kind of failures in a long-term project. But I do think that we achieved some kind of redistributive social justice. We made videos with kids who had never held an iPad before. We made videos with kids who had held an iPad but who had never made a thing before. We made them a lot, and we made different kinds of things. And 100, 200 kids got to make all these videos in time with school. And the teachers got to see that too, and the teachers got to experience it too. So I think that was a success. And I think, last thing, desire-centered work. Yeah, I think this really is a project focused on the desires of a community and the desires of students. And that's harder to do than you would think. And it's hard to find a context where you can do that and do it well. And I think that's it.